It's the 24th of June, 2021. Lunar observance, the full moon lunar observance day, also known as the Uposatha day or the Patimokkha observance day. So we chanted our Patimokkha, which we do every fortnight, the 227 bhikkhus rules. That gets chanted in Pali. It takes about 45 minutes to chant it at a high rate of speed. It's about 13,000 words in Pali that is memorized. So any Patimokkha chanter will have that memorized, and one of the monks who is the chanter will chant that, and there's always a checker. So if there's even a single mistake, then the checker stops the chanter and says the correct way to say that particular word or phrase. That's something we do once every 2 weeks, and that's something that has been done every fortnight since the Buddha was alive, unbroken, to the present day. That's a real thread. So the Theravada through the Theravada. That's something that defines us, a defining feature of the Theravada, or of our life here. And I included that little phrase, anutarang upachayang. So normally when we start a Dhamma talk, it's Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami, which just means I pay homage to Buddha Dhamma Sangha before giving a talk. But then this is a throwback to something Ajahn Ñāṇiko would do sometimes when starting a Dhamma talk, anutarang upachayang, adding that into Buddha Dhamma Sangha. So Buddha Dhamma Sangha and the unsurpassed upajaya. Upajaya means preceptor. So the unsurpassed preceptor, or one who ordains others, one who creates other monks. So the ultimate preceptor would be the Buddha, who is the creator of the Sangha, but also our different ajahns. So Ajahn Chah and Ajahn Pasano, who's away now. So that also refers to him. So he's left yesterday to go and spend the vasa period at the Pacific Hermitage, White Salmon, Washington. So Debbie and Anagarika Nick, they drove up with Longpo Pasano, Ajahn Kurudamo, and Anagarika Tai, who will be the group of 3 at Pacific Hermitage for the vasa period. And they've gone up about a month early. Normally when we spend vasa somewhere, we go early to settle in and before the actual formal entering of the vasa period. And in Thailand, when we go to a monastery in Thailand, usually they like us to be there about a month ahead of time. And this is just standard practice for us in our circle. And we've done the determining of the 8 precepts. So for people in Thailand, this would normally be done, the understanding that one is keeping the 8 precepts for a day and a night. So the lay people would say, come into Wat Pah Nanachat, undertake the 8 precepts for a day and a night. They would spend the whole day practicing in the monastery. Usually, like offering the meal, there'd be a Dhamma talk along with the meal. So like the meal would be offered, then there would be a Dhamma talk, and then we'd partake of the meal or eat the meal. And then around 1 p.m., the lay people would start practicing sitting and walking meditation, and then around 4:30 p.m. there'd be some tea and allowables, and then there'd be a evening puja, another Dhamma talk. So the lay people, starting about 1 p.m., they have a full day of practice, and then of course practicing into the night, not eating dinner that day. So keeping the vikala bhojana, keeping the 6th precept of not eating afternoon. And then listen to Dhamma talk, practice through the night. Usually there's some sort of tea or refreshments, coffee, cocoa. Have that at midnight. And then staying up actually through the night until dawn. So the morning puja, morning chanting would start at about 4 a.m. Dawn being roughly 5 a.m. So the whole evening would end about 5 a.m. and the lay people would take leave and they would recite a phrase, this phrase in Pali, which means we the lay people take our leave. We are busy and have much to do. So it's a phrase that comes up in the suttas when lay people would take leave of the Buddha. Now we are busy and have much to do, and the Buddha was able to go and do as you see fit. So we kind of copy that at the end of the Lunar Observance Day in Thailand. And it's pretty impressive that they do this, that these lay people, some of them, you have these, we call me-ok, pa-ok, the male and female lay people. Some of them are elderly, even in their 90s, staying up all night till dawn. And some of these really impressive elderly lay people, really impressive practitioners, and they can be teachers for the monks as well. So if we're feeling tired or despondent, or just like feeling like wanting to throw in the towel, we can watch the 80 or 90-year-old laywoman who's sitting up all night till dawn. Think, okay, well maybe I could do that. If she can do it, I can do it too. So that gives us the impetus to persevere and maybe do something which is outside of our comfort zone, outside of what we would normally feel comfortable with. And thus doing, then we can actually make the mind bright and train the mind, and the mind can start to settle. So the mind is very unruly, so it doesn't really start to settle unless we actually venture out into uncharted territory, venture outside of our comfort zone. And it doesn't mean we need to torture ourselves, but it's just a matter of pushing the envelope at least a little bit, just calling into question, what do we actually need in terms of food and sleep, and can I simplify things? And then this one day, the Lunar Observance Day, it's then the whole idea behind it is it's the day of striving. So the lay people come and they spend one day of striving with the meditation practice in the monastery, recollecting Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and especially recollecting the Buddha. That's why we're all here, because of the Buddha's awakening. So every tradition of Buddhism in the world comes from that one moment of the Buddha's awakening under the Bodhi tree, and all of that up to the present day. This monastery, all of the great Ajahns in Thailand, and every practitioner, and every lineage of practice, whatever it may be, even any vipassana lay practice lineage or any monastic lineage, it all comes from that moment of the Buddha's awakening. And so at tea time, we were having a little discussion about the Buddhist cosmology and devas and different realms of existence, and also just how to take refuge and develop faith in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. So I thought I would talk a little bit more about that, and I could geek out on the Buddha, as it were, and talk about the Buddha and the different things in the suttas a little bit, and something I find easy to talk about. This is a particular thing, there's a particular Pali phrase called Tathagata Bodhisattva. So that's faith in the awakening of the Tathagata, faith in the awakening of the Buddha. And that's a very important quality to be developing. And for myself, this is also Buddha Nusati, which is just recollection of the Buddha, and used for developing faith, which then in turn develops an impetus to persevere in the practice and not give up. It's acknowledging that the practice is difficult sometimes, and that there'll be times when we think, why am I actually practicing? Why am I doing all these difficult things? What's the point? Or it's like Lumpur Pasano was talking about one time, how feeling like he went to Wat Pah and had all this faith in Ajahn Chah and the practices that were happening there, and just people's faith in the Buddha, and then developing this really, really strong faith and confidence in the Buddha. And then sometime later, sitting in his kuti, cursing the Buddha. Why did you do this? Why did you make me do this? You give me all this faith and confidence and inspiration, and then 2 or 3 years later, just sheer drudgery of the practice. And, kind of, it's almost like the Buddha hooks us and gets us to start practicing, and then later on we realize just how difficult it is, how we have to persevere through all these difficulties and go outside of our comfort zone and meditate when we don't want to meditate, practice when we don't want to practice, and who would subject themselves to this, and why would we subject ourselves to this? So what's the whole point? Why are we even doing this? So it comes back to this Tathagata Bodhisattva, the faith in the awakening of the Buddha and the compassion of the Buddha as well. That the Buddha himself, when he was the Bodhisattva, so even before he was awakened, practiced so incredibly hard in his search for awakening. And even though he said that we don't need to do these severe austerities that he did, yet he was willing to do that to try and see, was that actually the path to enlightenment? So the fact that he was even willing to subject himself to that and put himself through that is pretty amazing. And to go to that level and never give up, be ready to even die trying to seek the deathless and not giving up, and just how much he relinquished as well. So he had the best of everything as a layman, had the best of everything, was in the best situation, the most comfortable situation, and was primed to be a leader, and had everything he could want, all the comfort, all the luxury he could ever want, and then actually giving that up, or seeing the lack of essence that all of that had, so actually giving that up, and just some of the story of the Buddha, or I'll call him the Bodhisattva, during this particular period, the Bodhisattva, the prince, actually leaving the home life, actually leaving the palace life. And for me, these things are very, very real. So anybody who develops a lot of faith in Buddha Dhamma Sangha, these things become very, very real. And in 2017, had the opportunity to do a pilgrimage to the different holy sites in India. And one of the newer or newly discovered, newly excavated holy sites is Kapilavatthu, where the Bodhisattva, where the Buddha actually grew up. So there's always been controversy. Before 2014, there was controversy as to what was the real Kapilavatthu. One of them was in India and one was in Nepal, and of course each country wants it to be in their country. So the Indians say, no, the real Kapilavatthu is in India, and in Nepal they're saying, no, it's in Nepal. And so we decided to go and visit the one in Nepal, because we had been at Lumbini, the site of the birth of the Bodhisattva in Lumbini, and not too far away is Kapilavatthu would be not too far away from Lumbini, because when Queen Mahamaya was actually going to give birth to her child, tradition had it that she would go to her home, which was Devadaha, so she would have traveled from Kapilavatthu to Devadaha, and Lumbini is somewhere in between those two, so we know that. And of course then giving birth, she didn't make it in time, and so giving birth at this site of Lumbini. So we have that much evidence to go on that Lumbini, the actual holy site of the birth of the Bodhisattva, is somewhere between Kapilavatthu and Devadaha. and we can be pretty sure where Devadaha is as well, so we can draw a line and say, okay, well, Lumbini is in this approximate location, but they didn't really know for sure until they were doing these excavations. And this particular site, so we went there, and in modern day it's called Tirakut or something like that. And any holy sites we go to in India, you're going to see old brick structures, brick chetties. Those post-date the Buddha by a few hundred years. So, time of the Buddha, they used apparently teak and adobe. So they used, in that particular area, teak timbers filled with adobe mud walls. So it's a combination of timber and adobe that they would have used at that time, and when we went there was Western archaeologists there at the site, which was unusual for an Indian or archaeological site. They were from Durham University, and they were also helping out with some of the discoveries that were being made there, because it was quite exciting. And so the way they discovered this was the actual Kapilavatthu was by digging down, and they knew they had to dig about 10 feet down to get to the time of the Buddha, roughly that time period, 500, 600 BC. And they get down there. So at the surface, of course, there's these Mauryan dynasty brickworks and so on, but they dig down, and they're doing these different 10-foot deep holes in different areas to see what they find. So this one particular area they found, and the key discovery, which was in 2014, was they dug down 10 feet and they found circles, like fossilized circles, where these teak posts had been sitting. And so they found these where these posts have been sitting. And back then, similar to now, lumber would have a stamp or an insignia on it, and at that time they had like wax or some sort of three-dimensional stamp they would put on their lumber, and so that this particular fossilized big post holes had also fossilized into it the insignia of Kapilavatthu, thus showing that lumber was lumber of Kapilavatthu. So they made that discovery, and then from there they could discover that this particular exact spot was where the Bodhisattva rode his chariot out to leave the home life and become the Buddha. And so we were able to go to the eastern gate of Kapilavatthu, confirmed that it's there, and then sit there and do some chanting. And for me, that was like really, really powerful, recollecting in my mind that moment of the Bodhisattva riding out and actually leaving the home life. And the interesting thing about this is when you go out the eastern gate of this particular area, they say he went for quite a ways and went to the Anoma River, which on a modern map is still called the Anoma River. And it's pretty far. It's like 90 miles east, maybe slightly south of this area. And that's where he cut off his hair and beard and donned the robes of the monastic and crossed the river into the neighboring country of Magadha. So he was in the Kosalan Republic, and then he crossed the river into this other country so that he's no longer bound by his own homeland. So he goes into Magadha to practice as a monk. And so it's just interesting that on a modern map, the river has the same name as in the original Pali in the suttas. And also, then it's said that his charioteer Channa came back with the horse. The horse's name was Kantaka, and then the horse died right before getting back to Kapilavatthu, and it's not sure why the horse died. They say it died in the commentaries it says the horse was heartbroken, that the Bodhisattva had left and he died of a broken heart. But also if you think of a horse going 90 miles and then 90 miles back, he could have died just of heart failure just because he was exhausted. So he could have died of exhaustion as well. And then it said there was a mound or a stupa built for the horse. And sure enough, right outside of the eastern gate, there is a mound that still, as far as I know, hasn't been excavated, but they say that's the chedi for the horse that died on his way back. So all these things somehow that geographically, sutta-wise, they all add up together. So when thinking about developing faith in the Buddha as as a historical entity or a historical person, it's I find it helpful just to think about things like that and how an actual person did that and gave up a life of wealth and privilege in order to seek something transcendent, something beyond. And there's some pretty interesting vignettes also from that very early period, from right after the Bodhisattva left home. So he shaves off his hair and beard and leaves all of his kind of princely ornaments behind and takes on, there's a few different stories as to how he acquires his robes, but we can think it was probably pretty rough rag robes that he decided to take on, and also we don't know how he acquired a bowl, but he has a bowl with him. And that meal chant that we do, the wisely reflecting, I use alms food, that actually comes from the first days of the after the leaving home of the Bodhisattva. So he's going alms around, but he's still got this. He's very tall. He's got this incredible presence and stature to him. Yet he's this strangeness that he's wearing rag robes and going for alms around, and the lay people are just don't know what to make of him. And so they support him with alms food, and it's the first time he's ever eaten his food all mixed together. And he looks at his food all mixed together in the bowl and says, well, now that I'm a wanderer, paribhajika, now that I'm a wandering ascetic, it's not. He has a brief moment where he wants to separate the foods out. And he says, well, it's more appropriate for me to have it all mixed together like this in one receptacle without thinking about separating it out. And that's where then he says, wisely reflecting, I use this alms food not for fun, not for pleasure, not for fattening, not for beautification, only for the maintenance of the body, for keeping it healthy, for helping strive, for helping with the holy life. So that comes from that time. Of course, word spreads. There's this very unusual monk around, and by probably the most accurate accounts, he was about 6'7", so he was tall, not unhumanly tall, but tall and impressive looking. And word gets back to the king of Magadha, King Bimbisara, that there's this really unusual monk practicing in his kingdom. And so King Bimbisara immediately starts to develop faith and, what's going on here? Let's go check him out. So King Bimbisara goes with his entourage to see what's going on here, and he says, right away he's very impressed, and he says, your look is unusual. You look like some sort of warrior noble, not like other monks that we've seen in the past. And what's your background? What is your upbringing? And then the Bodhisattva says, well, I'm actually Sakyen and was being brought up as a prince, and that's my background. And so, but now I've decided to seek the deathless, and that's my aim. And then King Bimbisara says, you're greater than I am, like you're just like me. You were someone who was going to be like me, and you've given it all up, like you willingly. And so in this fit of faith, King Bimbisara says, I offer you the entire kingdom. I offer you my entire kingdom. And then the Bodhisattva just says, thanks, but no thanks. And I'm not intent on sensual pleasures. And kingdoms like this, I leave behind just like spittle in the dust. And I'm not interested. And of course, King Bimbisara, even more faith, he says, well, this is very, very impressive. And if you achieve your aim, please, I hope that I can be one of your first disciples. And so the Bodhisattva just nods, and King Bimbisara goes away. So this is right at the beginning, even before he's sought out his original teachers. And of course, later on, as the story goes, he does, after 6 years of practice, achieves his aim, and then he actually keeps his promise. So the way it pans out, the movements that the Buddha ends up making after he teaches the first 5 disciples in the deer park, and that's the first vasa, where they're all practicing together, and he brings the first 5 bhikkhus to arhantship. Then he moves in the direction of Magadha, and meets up with various other characters during that time, of course, the 1,000 fire ascetics and so on. But he actually is moving in the direction of Magadha, and then once he meets up with King Bimbisara, and King Bimbisara, upon hearing teachings, he attains stream entry. And at that time, Magadha was one of the most powerful kingdoms in all of India, and so once King Bimbisara had become a student of the Buddha, of the newly awakened Buddha, then the whole kingdom is then goes through this huge transition period, and at that point Buddhism is established in India and becomes very widespread very quickly. And so sometimes, thinking about these kind of things, for myself, I can think about these things and try to think, how did that actually play out, and can be helpful for developing that sense of faith and confidence, both in the reality of the Buddha, but also in the efficacy of the Buddha's teaching and the example of many of his disciples, King Bimbisara included, who he himself had some good things to say. So of course, this is something which happened a very, very long time ago now, and we can't say exactly how it played out. But what we do know is we have what we have today. We have great practitioners, the Thai Kruba Ajahns, and also in many countries, great practitioners in China, Tibet, Burma, Laos, Cambodia, and even elsewhere. All these countries have had great and notable practitioners over the century, and it really comes back to because this person who became the Buddha decided to do what he did out of compassion so long ago. So if we think about the Buddha eventually passing away after a 45-year teaching ministry, and him telling his disciples gathered at that time that the best way you can honor the Buddha is through practice, is not through offerings, but it's through practice. When I heard about that particular teaching, I thought, oh yeah, that's I know I'm in the right place, because who would say something like that, if it wasn't completely genuine and completely compassionate. Remember when I first came to Abhayagiri, one of the first talks I heard was when I first came here as a guest in May of 2001. It was just Ajahn Pasano was here. Ajahn Amaro was away. So Ajahn Amaro and Ajahn Pasano were co-abbots at the time. Ajahn Amaro was away on the East Coast doing some teaching, and it was just Ajahn Pasano here. And of course, whoever else was here at that time, Debbie was here. And so I didn't attend that many teachings. I think it was just one Wanpra. I don't even know if I was here on a Saturday night talk or not. Probably was, but I do remember the Wanpra, trying to stay up, the Lunar Observance Day. But then when I came back to stay on June 23rd, 2001, when I came back to stay, Ajahn Pasano was away. I think he was in Canada, and Ajahn Amaro was the only one here. So one of the first talks I heard him give was about the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, and was about how if you want to truly honor the Buddha, you honor the Buddha through practice. And for me, that was like, yeah, this is a good place. I'm in the right place, because intuitively that just felt right. That to hear something like that, and to know that, oh yeah, it's not about gaining material offerings or anything material. We have very good facilities here, and we are very well supported, but it's not about that. It's about what can we do to support ourselves in the practice, and keeping that in mind. Just always keeping that in mind. There's one place in the suttas where the Buddha talks about how do you keep moving forward in the practice? How do you make sure you're going to keep progressing? And the Buddha, even when he was alive, he recognized there's monasteries being built up, there's work, there's monks doing work. And so the Buddha was generally down on monks getting too involved in work projects or getting too intoxicated with work projects. But at the same time, he recognized it was something that had to be done. So he said one way to keep moving forward in the practice is that one of the factors of stream entry, actually, is that if a monk is busy doing this or that for the monastery or for his fellows in the holy life, then he never lets go of the thought in his mind that as soon as I can, I'm going to get back to the important work. So as soon as I can, I'm going to get away and do my sitting meditation, get away and do my walking meditation. And to keep that in mind and do that as soon as possible, and that's actually a factor of stream entry, to keep that in mind, to keep reminding oneself of that. So it's not to be like really against doing work or looking after things, but it's just that if you keep that in mind, then when there is an opening, go right back to the meditation, go right back to the work of cultivating the mind. We can also partly do that while we're working. We can be practicing dana and patient endurance, but then we get back to that really important work of letting go whenever we can. So that's why we have these days like the Lunar Observance Day, or why we have that structure of just having a morning and evening puja. So we at least keep that thread, we at least keep that energy going. And something like the Lunar Observance Day, when we can actually have a chunk of time to meditate, or we have the winter retreat, or during the vasa period we do these 2-week solitary retreats where every member of the community will get a 2-week solitary, and that's a very important time to really be getting back to what's truly important. So Tathagata Bodhisattva, good word to remember and contemplate, make much of, and I'll leave that for this evening.